more than 100 years, Canada and the United States have shared an undefended border. The Canadian Army and the American Army have long been partners in the defense of two free nations. In Europe and in Korea, Canadian and American soldiers have fought side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in keeping with a proud heritage. With me here at the historic Citadel Fortress at Quebec are two of Canada's soldiers, Regimental Sergeant Major McManus and Company Sergeant Major Dansereau. Sergeant Major, you're with the Canadian Guards, aren't you?
Yes, Sergeant Queen. I am a member of the Regiment of Canadian Guards. The regiment was formed in 1953 and became Canada's first national regiment. Its motto, Amaria Usque et Maria, means from sea to sea.
And what of your assignment, Sergeant Major Dansereau?
Yes, Sergeant Queen. I am with le 1er Bataillon Royal 22e Régiment, quarter at La Citadelle. We are a French-speaking unit. Most of our men are French descent and come from La Province de Quebec.
I'm told that the Royal 22nd Regiment is frequently referred to as the Vandus. What's the story behind this?
Yes, we are known as Vandus by the English-speaking people. They have difficulty to pronounce 22e Régiment. Now, come along and we watch the changing of the guard.
The traditions of Canada's regiments have been nurtured by the older British customs and provide added luster to the parade ground. One of the most famous summer sights in Quebec City is the daily inspection and changing of the guard at the Citadel by the Royal 22nd Regiment. These 19th century uniforms belie the modern professional soldiers who wear them. The regiment is led on parade by Baptiste the Goat, a gift from Queen Elizabeth. These ceremonials are an important part of a proud military heritage. They are very much a symbol of Canada's modern fighting force, highly trained to assume the military responsibilities of a growing nation. Although the Royal 22nd has carved a special reputation of its own in war and peace, and it is typical of many units in Canada's present-day army. At this colorful show in the Citadel, even Baptiste has his horns gilded for the officer of the guard. But Canada's army man is only incidentally a ceremonial soldier. His primary function is to fight, if and when necessary. How well he has done it in the past is written on battlefields from Paardeberg, South Africa, to Seoul, Korea. The solitary sentinel in front of the Citadel's historic entrance waits to be relieved by the morning guard mount. Here in the show window of the Army, the new sentry takes over his post, stiff and impassive, standing well over 6 feet tall in his great bearskin busby, embodying a tradition of duty as old as Canada. On the nearby plains of Abraham, in 1759, British General Wolfe lost his life and won Canada for Britain. The English victory over General Montcalm's force marked the destiny of Canada as a British Commonwealth nation. French and English Canadians were united. And by 1885, when the Governor General's bodyguard crossed the ice of Lake Superior to help quell the Northwest Rebellion, Canada was fast becoming a nation. The Canadian Army received its baptism as the Indian lands in the West were settled. Although Canadians fought in South Africa's Boer War at the turn of the century, it was not until the outbreak of World War I in 1914 that Canada was called upon to put a large modern army into combat overseas. During these war years, many of Canada's finest regiments came into being. Some were raised and equipped with private funds. They learned how to soldier, and they went to France, to the tragedy and victory of a great and terrible war. Montsorel, the Somme, Amiens, Festubert, Ypres, Vimy Ridge. When the Germans launched a gas attack at Ypres in April 1915, the Canadian 1st Division took the brunt of it. But more than once across the vast and bloody front, Canadian soldiers paid the Germans back. In 1918, the Canadian Army emerged from the mud of the French battlefields. The Black Watch of Canada alone was awarded 23 separate battle honors, and the Queen's Own Rifles 21. The Germans had been beaten, and Canada shared the sweet taste of victory. 4 years of struggle in a crucible of fire. The Canadian Army left 60,000 men behind when it returned from France. Today, a simple monument in Ottawa pays silent tribute to their memory and to the spirit they personify. 68 Canadian soldiers were awarded the Commonwealth's highest decoration, the Victoria Cross, upon which is inscribed with simple eloquence, "For Valor." In 1922, the Canadian Parliament passed the National Defence Act, which provided the peacetime blueprint for Canada's armed forces. The regular army numbers approximately 49,000, all volunteers. Between World Wars I and II, the regular army dwindled, seldom numbering more than 4,000. When war broke out in 1939, the National Defence Headquarters had to draw heavily from local militia units. Canada's first troops embarked for Europe in December 1939, and a continual flow of soldiers was channeled into the Allied war effort over the next 6 years. Most of these early troops, comprising the Canadian 1st Division, were volunteers from militia units. Not until August 1942 did the Canadians make their first combat assault on the German stronghold in Europe. The objective was a small port on the Channel coast, the French resort town of Dieppe. The Dieppe raid was to serve as the preliminary experience for the main invasion of France, still 2 years distant. Although the raid itself was a tactical failure, Dieppe proved that the new Canadian Army could fight as well as that of 1918. Few of the combat objectives were realized on the beach, but the many lessons learned by the Allies paid off in future amphibious operations. Of the 4,900 Canadians who went in on the Dieppe beach, less than half returned to England. At Buckingham Palace, many of those who came back were honored by the King and watched in silent admiration by the English crowd. The Canadian heroes of Dieppe represented all ranks and a cross-section of units from the Army. They represented, too, a cross-section of Canada. The courage and the fighting skill they demonstrated was not simply the Army's story. It belonged to the nation. Christmas of 1943 found many Canadians celebrating in the picturesque Italian village of Ortona. The Germans disliked giving up their quarters just before the holidays, but the Canadians could not wait. Through a cautiously ingenious technique called mouse-holing, the loyal Edmonton Regiment and men of the Seaforth Highlanders leveled the town one room at a time.